She came to my house on a Tuesday. Not to grieve, not to check on me. To collect. Vanessa had her mother's eyes and her father's jaw. And she had spent 22 years making sure I knew I was never truly part of this family. Now Raymond had been gone 11 weeks. And she arrived at my kitchen table with a briefcase. A lawyer named Gerald with small wet eyes. And a smile that didn't reach anything above her cheekbones. I made coffee because that's what you do. You make coffee. You keep your hands busy so they don't shake. She didn't touch hers. She just slid the document across the table like she was dealing a card in a game she'd already won. Thick stack of pages. Lawyer's letterhead on top. Little yellow sticky arrows pointing to signature lines. 3 of them on the last page. It's straightforward, Darlene, she said, and the way she used my name had always felt like a small insult. The way you'd name a stray cat you tolerated but never loved. The house was my father's before you married him. The estate lawyers agree it should revert to his biological heirs. Biological heirs. She said it like I was a stranger who had wandered in off the street. I looked at the document. I looked at Gerald with his small wet eyes. I looked at my stepdaughter. This woman who had stood at my wedding to her father and cried, not from happiness, but from something closer to fury dressed up as sentiment. And then I reached under my placemat. Because I had known this day was coming for 11 years. I slid one single page across the table. Face down at first. Then I turned it over slowly. The way you turn over a card when you already know what it says. Read page 1 first, I said. Vanessa picked it up. Her eyes moved across the lines. I watched the color leave her face the way water drains from a tub, slow at first. Then suddenly all at once. Gerald leaned over to read it too. His hand stopped moving on his notepad. The kitchen went so quiet I could hear the refrigerator hum. Let me tell you how we got here. My name is Darlene Marsh. I'm 61 years old, and I've lived in this house in Columbus, Ohio for 22 years. I came into it as Raymond Calloway's wife, his second wife, on a rainy Saturday in May when his daughter Vanessa was 24 years old and had already decided she hated me before I finished saying my vows. Raymond and I met the way quiet people sometimes find each other. Slowly, without fanfare, in the reading section of a used bookstore on High Street where we both reached for the same worn copy of a John Steinbeck novel on a cold October afternoon. He was 53. I was 39. He laughed when our hands touched the spine at the same moment. And I thought, there is a man who still knows how to be surprised by small things. That felt rare to me. That felt worth paying attention to. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. Raymond was careful about things that mattered. He was a civil engineer, retired early after selling a small infrastructure firm he had built from nothing over 30 years. He was thoughtful, unhurried, and genuinely kind in the deep-down way that isn't performance, the kind of kindness that shows up when no one's watching. He had one daughter, Vanessa, and he had warned me, gently but clearly, on our 6th date over dinner at a small Italian restaurant downtown. She's protective of her mother's memory, he said, folding his napkin carefully. Her mother passed when Vanessa was 17. It shaped her in ways I don't think either of us fully understands. She may not welcome you easily. I appreciated that he told me the truth. I didn't fully understand what that truth would cost me. Vanessa was 22 when Raymond and I started dating. By then she had already graduated from Ohio State, was working at a marketing firm downtown, and had developed a personality I can only describe as strategic. Everything she did served a purpose. Every kindness had a calculation behind it. Every smile was positioned. With me, she didn't bother with the positioning. The first time we met, Raymond brought me to Sunday dinner at the house that would eventually become mine. Though I didn't know that yet. Vanessa had cooked, which I thought was a good sign. She served the food, smiled at her father, answered my questions with perfectly courteous two-word responses, and spent the entire meal looking at me the way you look at something you're trying to figure out how to return. After dinner, when Raymond stepped out to take a phone call, she cleared the plates without offering to let me help and said, very quietly, without turning around, "He'll get over this." I didn't respond. I had learned young that some words are invitations to a fight. And fighting was her territory, not mine. Raymond proposed the following spring. On the porch of a rental cabin in the Hocking Hills. With rain coming down in silver curtains over the trees and fireflies just starting to flicker at the tree line. He had the ring in his shirt pocket, his mother's ring. A small diamond with 2 sapphires on either side, and he gave it to me with both hands. The way you give something you've been carrying carefully for a long time. I said yes before he finished the question. When he told Vanessa, she drove over that same evening. I wasn't there for the conversation. But Raymond told me later that she cried for 40 minutes and said that marrying me was a betrayal of her mother. He held her through it, because that's who Raymond was. And he told her gently that her mother's memory would always be sacred to him. And that loving someone new was not the same as forgetting. She came to the wedding. She wore black. The first years were what I would call survivable. Vanessa and I developed a careful choreography of civil distance. She visited on holidays, spoke to Raymond warmly, spoke to me minimally, and found small ways to remind me, consistently, reliably, that I was a guest in a home that had existed before me and would, in her view, outlast me. She called the house, Dad's house, in every conversation. Always. Never, your house, or home. When she gave the address to anyone in my presence, she would say, my dad's place on Briarwood, as if I were simply a feature of his living situation rather than his wife. She moved the photographs. That was the one that took me longest to name. In the living room, there was a built-in shelf where Raymond had placed framed photos of the two of us, our wedding photo. A trip to the Smoky Mountains. A Christmas morning that I still consider one of the happiest of my life. Every few months, I would notice those photos had migrated, pushed to the edge, turned slightly, eventually replaced by older photos of Raymond and her mother, of Vanessa's childhood, of a family that existed before I did. Raymond noticed eventually. He quietly moved my photos back each time without making it an occasion. That was his way, steady, consistent, not dramatic. He loved me loudly in the private ways that counted and refused to make our home a battlefield. But he was also, I would come to understand, carrying more than I knew. Raymond had a heart condition he disclosed to me on our third date. The way honest people do, early, clearly, without minimizing. An inherited structural issue that his cardiologist monitored carefully, managed with medication and quarterly check-ins. Not an emergency but a permanent presence in the background of our lives. He was disciplined about it. Exercise, diet, sleep, stress management. He treated his heart the way he treated everything he valued, with attention and respect. What I didn't know, for the first several years of our marriage, was that Raymond had also been quietly restructuring his estate. The house on Briarwood was Raymond's before we married. He had bought it in 1987, raised Vanessa in it, rebuilt the back porch and the kitchen with his own hands during summers off from his firm. It was, by any reasonable measure, deeply his, soaked through with his history, his choices, his labor. I had never asked him about ownership. It felt intrusive. It felt mercenary. I had my own small savings. My teaching pension from 20 years in the Columbus School District. My own quiet financial footing. I didn't marry Raymond for his house. But Raymond, being Raymond, had thought about it anyway. He told me about the first will in year 3 of our marriage. Sitting at the same kitchen table where Vanessa would one day slide her papers. He explained that his original estate plan, written when Vanessa was his only family, left everything to her, the house, his investments, the remaining profits from the firm sale. He said he was having it revised to include me properly. I told him there was no rush. He said there was always a rush with hearts like his. He updated the will that autumn. I signed the paperwork as a witness to his signature. His attorney, a quiet woman named Patricia Holt on Dublin Road, handled the documentation. The new will gave me the house outright. A spousal right of survivorship that was ironclad and clear. Vanessa would inherit his investment accounts, substantial. More than enough, and I would have the home we had built our life in. Raymond told Vanessa about the change. She didn't speak to him for 4 months. When she came back smiling. That was the part that should have told me everything. People who accept disappointment gracefully show it in their eyes. People who are building a longer plan go quiet in a different way. They get careful. They get pleasant. They start paying very close attention. Vanessa became, in the years that followed, almost manageable. She came to dinners. She helped when Raymond's health required extra hands. She was warm to me in public in a way that left me no legitimate complaint to raise. But I watched her watch things. I watched her catalog. I watched her build a case I couldn't see yet. And 11 years ago, I found out what she had done. Raymond had a hospitalization in year 11 of our marriage, a cardiac event. Not catastrophic but serious enough to require a week in the ICU and a significant medication adjustment. I was with him every day. Vanessa came the second day. Stayed 3 hours. Spoke to the cardiologist privately in a way that made the nurse at the station glance at me sideways. He came home. He recovered. And 6 weeks after his discharge, I was looking for a pen in the home office drawer and I found a document I hadn't seen before. It was a new will. Dated during Raymond's hospitalization. His signature on the last page. But something about it looked different. Not the pen. Not the witness lines. Not the notary seal. But something in the spacing. The font weight. Something I couldn't name precisely but couldn't stop noticing. This new will left the house to Vanessa. It left me a cash sum, generous enough to seem fair. Specific enough to seem calculated. And named Vanessa executor of the entire estate. I sat with that document for a long time. I didn't confront Raymond. I want to be honest about that because people always ask why not. And the truth is complicated. He was recovering. He was fragile in ways he would never admit. And there was a part of me that was afraid of what he might say. Afraid that the hospitalization had frightened him into decisions I wasn't going to like. Afraid that Vanessa had gotten to him in those 3 private hours in a way I couldn't undo by pushing. Instead, I did something else. I called Patricia Holt. Patricia was a small woman with reading glasses perpetually pushed up on her head and the kind of measured voice that never changed register regardless of what she was saying. I had always liked her. She had handled Raymond's estate work for over 15 years. I told her I needed to see her privately. Not Raymond, just me. She saw me the following Thursday. I brought the document I had found. Patricia studied it for a long time without speaking. Then she looked up at me over her reading glasses and said, very carefully, "Darlene, I did not prepare this document. I already knew. But hearing it said out loud by someone else made the room tilt slightly. The original will, the one Raymond had updated in year 3. The one with my name on it, the spousal right of survivorship, was still on file in Patricia's office. It had never been revoked. It had never been superseded by any document she had prepared. What I had found in the drawer was a document prepared by someone else. Someone who had gotten Raymond's signature during a period of medical vulnerability. Possibly with his full knowledge and possibly without. What do? I asked her. Patricia leaned back in her chair and looked at me with the expression of someone who had seen this particular scenario before and had specific thoughts about it. You keep the original, she said. You keep a certified copy here with me. And you wait, because there are 2 possibilities. Either Raymond knows about this second document and chose it, in which case you need to have that conversation with him. Or he doesn't know, in which case the document is fraudulent. And you will need both versions when the time comes. How will I know which? I asked. Watch what happens next, she said. What happened next was nothing. No conversation from Raymond about estate changes. No mention of the will. No indication that he knew there was a second document in our home office drawer. He recovered fully over the following months. Returned to his morning walks and his book club and his careful, attentive love for me that never once wavered. And I understood then that he didn't know. Vanessa had forged his signature. Or had arranged for it to be signed during a medicated, disoriented window in the hospital when Raymond wasn't fully himself. She had prepared the ground 11 years in advance. Planted the document in a drawer where I might eventually find it, or might not, and waited. I kept her secret for 11 years. Not because I was afraid. Not because I was weak. But because I understood, sitting in Patricia Holt's office on that Thursday afternoon, that the moment I acted on what I knew, the clock started. And clocks, once started, cannot be unstarted. I wanted Raymond to live his life without the knowledge of what his daughter had done. I wanted him to love her without that shadow between them. He had already lost her mother. I would not take his daughter from him, even the version of her he believed in. That was the choice I made. I made it willingly and I made it with my eyes open. Raymond died on a Sunday morning in March, 11 weeks before Vanessa arrived at my table. He had made his coffee, settled into his reading chair by the window with a biography of a civil rights attorney he had been working through for 2 weeks, and simply didn't wake from what I thought was a nap. The cardiologist said it was peaceful, that it was the best version of what his heart condition had always made possible, that he had managed it well and lived well, and that the end, when it came, had come quietly. I sat with him for an hour before I called anyone. Just sat beside the chair and held his hand and talked to him the way I had always talked to him, about small things. About the book he hadn't finished. About the robin that had started building a nest in the azalea bush by the back porch. Then I called Patricia Holt's emergency line. Before I called Vanessa. I want to be clear about that sequence. It wasn't cold. It wasn't calculated. It was simply the rational action of a woman who had been holding a legal document in a safe deposit box for 11 years and understood that grief does not pause for paperwork. Patricia sent a courier to my house within 2 hours. Certified copies of the original will. Notarized, time-stamped, legally unimpeachable. I put one copy in my purse. I placed one copy flat under the placemat on the kitchen table. I kept the original in the safe deposit box at Fifth Third Bank downtown. Then I called Vanessa and told her that her father was gone. The grief at the funeral was real. I have to believe that. Whatever Vanessa was and whatever she had done, Raymond was her father and she had loved him in the damaged, possessive way that some people love, holding too tight, unable to share, terrified of losing what they'd already lost once. I stood beside her at the graveside and I did not hate her. I felt something closer to sorrow for her, for the version of this family she could have had if she'd been willing to let it be bigger than her fear. But grief has a short shelf life for people with agendas. 3 weeks after the funeral, the calls started. From Gerald, the small-eyed lawyer I would come to know by name. Questions about the estate. Questions about the will. Questions about my plans for the property. Each call pleasant, each call fishing. I answered everything calmly and said I was still grieving and would be in touch in due time. The Tuesday she came to the house, that particular Tuesday, was 11 weeks after Raymond's passing to the day. She had called the previous Friday to say she needed to discuss the estate in person. I said of course, come Tuesday morning. I made sure Patricia Holt knew the meeting was happening. I texted my neighbor Carol, who had been my closest friend in Columbus for 15 years, to let her know she might want to be available by phone. And I put the certified copy of the original will under my kitchen placemat. So when Vanessa sat down across from me with Gerald and his notepad and her thick stack of documents with the yellow sticky arrows, I was completely ready. I let her talk. I let Gerald talk. I let them explain. calmly and with the careful language of people who believe they hold the winning hand. That the estate had been reviewed. That a valid will existed naming Vanessa as the primary heir of the property. That I would of course receive the cash bequest as specified. Which was, Gerald said, looking at his papers, $320,000. A generous sum. Enough to buy something smaller. Something more appropriate for a woman living alone in her 60s. I watched Vanessa's face as Gerald spoke and I saw something I recognized. Relief. The particular relief of someone who has waited a long time for a moment and is finally watching it arrive. She thought it was over. She thought she had won. I let the silence sit for exactly 5 seconds after Gerald finished speaking. Then I reached under my placemat. The document I placed on the table was a single page. Certified copy. Notarized. Patricia Holt's letterhead at the top. The date visible clearly, October 14th. Year 3 of Raymond's and my marriage. His signature at the bottom in blue ink. I had always loved Raymond's handwriting. Deliberate and clear. The signature of a man who meant what he wrote. And beside it, the notary seal that made it legally binding in the state of Ohio. I turned it face up slowly. The way you turn over a card when you already know what it says. Read page 1 first, I said. I watched Vanessa read. I watched the color leave her. I watched Gerald lean over. Read the header. Read the date. And quietly set down his pen. The kitchen was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator hum. This is, Vanessa started. Her voice had lost its edge. This is the original will. It is, I said. But there's a more recent. No, I said quietly. There isn't. Gerald cleared his throat and straightened the papers in front of him with the careful movements of a man recalculating his position. He asked to see the full document. I slid a second certified copy across the table. The full will. All 11 pages. Prepared by Patricia Holt. Legally unrevoked. Legally binding. He read it slowly. Then he read it again. When he looked up, he didn't look at Vanessa. He looked at his notepad. Then he looked at me. Mrs. Marsh, he said carefully, this document appears to predate the will my client. It predates it, I confirmed. And it was never revoked. Not by Raymond. Not by any attorney of record. I have the full case history from Patricia Holt's firm if you need it. She's available this afternoon by phone. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence. Not the stunned silence of revelation. But the working silence of people recalculating. Gerald was already thinking about his own liability. About the document Vanessa had presented him. About whether he had asked all the questions he should have asked before walking into this kitchen. Vanessa was not calculating. Vanessa was staring at the single page on the table between us as if she could change what it said by looking at it hard enough. I want you to know something, I said, and my voice was steady in a way that surprised even me. I found the document you put in the office drawer 11 years ago. I want you to know that I have known for 11 years. Her head came up. I didn't tell your father. I continued. Because your father loved you and I loved your father. And I wasn't going to spend whatever time we had left with him carrying the weight of what you had done. That was my choice. I don't regret it. I folded my hands on the table. But I want you to sit with that for a moment. Vanessa. Your father spent the last 11 years of his life believing you had accepted his marriage. Believing you had made your peace with me. He died thinking that his family was whole. I gave him that. Not because you earned it, but because he did. Vanessa opened her mouth. Closed it. Her hands, flat on the table, were shaking. Gerald gathered his papers. Quietly, efficiently, without meeting anyone's eyes. He said he would be in touch with his client. He said it in the voice of a man who already knew this client relationship was ending. He thanked me for the coffee he hadn't touched and let himself out the front door. The sound of it closing was very soft. Vanessa and I sat in the kitchen together for a long moment after Gerald left. Just the two of us. The way it had so rarely been in 22 years. No Raymond as buffer. No performance of civility for his benefit. "Why didn't you fight?" she asked finally. And her voice was strange, stripped of the calculation. Raw in a way I hadn't heard from her before. "You had this the whole time. Why didn't you use it?" "I just told you why," I said. "You should have told him." Her voice cracked slightly. "You should have shown him what I did and let him." "Hate you?" I asked. "That's what would have happened. Vanessa. You know your father. You know how he felt about honesty. About trust. He would have been destroyed by it. I wasn't willing to do that to him." She looked at me for a long time. And I saw something move across her face that I had never seen there before. Not calculation. Not hostility. Something much more uncomfortable for a woman like Vanessa. Shame. "I don't know what the future holds between us. I'm not naive enough to think that one moment of reckoning repairs 22 years of deliberate erosion." Vanessa left that Tuesday morning without the papers she came with. She left without her lawyer. She left with a certified copy of the original will and the full weight of understanding that I had always held the winning hand and had chosen. For 11 years. Not to play it. Whether she calls me. Whether we find some version of what we could have been to each other. Whether shame becomes something more useful over time, I don't know. Those are questions for a future I haven't arrived at yet. What I know is this. I am still in this house. Raymond's house. My house. The house where I made 22 years of dinners and pressed his shirts and watched the robin build her nest in the azalea bush each April. I am sitting in the reading chair by the window where he spent his last morning. And outside, in the early spring cold, the first green is pushing through the garden beds he planted the year we were married. Some things are patient enough to come back. Some things keep growing in the dark, waiting for the season to change. I learned that from a man who loved me well, and from 11 years of knowing exactly what I was waiting for. And that was just the beginning. Because what happened next? 6 weeks later. When Vanessa called me on a Wednesday evening and said 4 words I never expected to hear from her. I never saw coming. Subscribe. So you don't miss what comes next.